Hey guys, what is up? I'm Swim, this is the stream, and this is my first ever full item tier list. There's a link in the description if you want to just get the image for yourself. I do plan on changing some of these things around. I expect in something like a week, I'll probably have tweaked it like just maybe like one or two things that I might slightly like, you know, put up or put down like a little bit. But for now, this is my current version of how I would rank these items. Now, I want to point out a few things. A, they're patching this game very quickly. So this is as of June 29th, and I expect they might do some things. For example, this item here, chainmail, might get nerfed, and if it does, you know, it's going to be significantly worse. You know, and I'll update this tier list as changes happen. But I plan to make this an ongoing thing. Secondly, you'll notice I haven't included most of the kind of alliance-based globals, just because they're really hard to rate and really dependent on what you're doing. I do have some of them in here, as you can see, Fall from Grace and Retaliate, just because there's some of them that I think are extremely general purpose, and you can run them in almost any build, and therefore they get ranked among the rest. So for the rest of this video, I basically just want to kind of quickly brush through and talk about why I have these ranked the way that they are, and exactly like what situations that might make this differ, just to kind of go a little bit more in depth for this. But basically, Embarrassment of Riches first up. This is just very good early game. The ability to get one additional item choice per neutral round is super great, and of course, you just want to be picking this early. You know, if you get this in the first 3 rounds, you're typically just very, very happy. I will say at this point in time, if I get this round 3 in the same pack as chainmail, that's a hard decision for me, because you do want this in round 1 or round 2, if possible. Next up, chainmail. This item's straight busted. 10 armor is ridiculous. This is going to reduce damage by, depending on the initial armor you have on the unit, you will be reducing damage by upwards of 30% physical damage to that unit, which is very powerful. It also has the ability to somewhat decrease the mana gain that the opponents can gain from attacking your unit, depending on, you know, how much damage they're doing, but that's how mana gain is calculated. It's based on the amount of damage being dealt and the amount of mana you are giving the opponent with chainmail. One caveat is you are making it slower to charge your own mana with chainmail because you are taking less damage, but that's the price you pay. When you run chainmail, you typically have a unit right up in front, and that unit will just tank everything, especially if it's like 2-star early on unit with a chainmail. I run like 2 warriors flanking on the sides, and it will win a ton of early fights. Then we've got Blightstone and Gloves of Haste. I've done a lot of math on these two, and I ended up putting them basically around the same. It depends on a lot of variables, but ultimately the amount of DPS you get from them is very comparable. Gloves of Haste will increase your mana gain by a little bit more. Mana gain is mostly a function of attack speed in this game, but it can sometimes be a little bit about the damage you deal up to a certain point. The Blightstone debuff that gives -3 armor will on average increase the DPS you deal to a single target by around 16%, maybe like 14%. Again, it depends on how much armor they have from the start on all targets attacking that, which is very powerful. The debuff lasts for 5 seconds, so it'll even persist a little bit after your unit dies. Typically, you just want to put these on like the DPS heroes that are going to be surviving later on into a fight. Vitality Booster is just a nice item to be able to win the early game. It'll help you have something like a level 1 ult caster, like a level 1 Tidehunter or a level 1 Enigma is very dependent on just like a little bit more basic health. But ultimately, the reason this item is ranked below something like Gloves of Haste and something like Blightstone is just because chainmail is so good. If chainmail got nerfed, I could actually see about putting Vit Booster a little bit higher. But mostly it's for early game fighting or helping one of those heroes get their ults off. Then I've got Brooch of the Martyr. This one is a little bit hard to place just because it depends on what you're going. If you're in mages, this is really good. You want to slap this on something that wants to gain mana, typically up front and taking damage, and this is just going to be pretty good in those situations. I do think if I have something like a Tidehunter It's a pretty close call between like Brooch and Vitality Booster being on it. I could see an argument for Brooch actually being bumped up ahead of Vitality Booster. They're fairly comparable, and I will say this one is largely dependent on like your positioning. If you are kind of like a new player and you're not necessarily sure exactly how to position things, you might actually gain a bit more value out of Claymore, which we have up next. It's just flat 21 attack damage, typically. So a lot of people ask, like, why is Gloves ahead of Claymore? 21 attack damage versus 20 attack speed. How is that calculated? So attack speed is typically over, if you have a unit with over 100 damage, attack speed is just a better metric than attack damage, right? And that refers to basically any 2-star unit or higher, or anything with a passive, or anything that wants to charge mana, because keep in mind, mana charges faster off of attack speed than damage. So that's why Claymore is ranked so low. I think a lot of people rank this item a lot higher. It can help a few early game fights. If you've got something like a Bloodseeker level 2, it's actually kind of cute to equip it with a Claymore, and it can win early game fights. But I think Underlords is all about these late game potential situations, and in those I'd rather have something like an additional Gloves or a Blightstone. Those are going to scale much better into the late game. Then we've got Tranquil Boots. A lot of people were excited for this item when it was announced. 16 health regen is really great to be able to equip to one of your heroes. Unfortunately, most of its utility is in the early game, and it's just a little bit too slow. It's not going to do as much as most of the other items, but it is still better than Cloak. Sorry, Cloak. 15% magic resistance just does not really cut it for me. In a mage meta, I mean, the thing is, even when you compare this to Tranquil Boots, right? In a mage meta, I could see picking this ahead of Tranquil Boots, but even then, in like something like 4 or 5 seconds that your units are going to be alive, that HP regen might actually end up doing more than something like magic resist. And keep in mind, HP regen means more HP to lose, which means more mana gained. So you have a higher ability to cast your spells and get your spells off with Tranquil Boots than with Cloak. Next up, we get into the tier 2s, Fall from Grace and Smuggler. These are nuts. These are crazy. The power spike from any of the items I just discussed and these two items is absolutely ridiculous. Fall from Grace. So human units count as heartless when counting alliances. So you do lose the human unit alliance, which is definitely small downside, but in something like warriors, in something like knights, even in something like hunters that can run something like Kunkka and Lycan as their warrior flex slot, this is going to do a crazy amount for you. The second tier of Heartless makes it minus 10 armor instead of minus 5 armor. And again, armor calculations depend on exactly how much you start with, but this is going to increase your physical DPS across your entire team by about 20%, right? Depending on the amount of armor your opponent has. I'm going to say that again because that's completely ridiculous. This is literally, if you look at tier 5, we have Desperate Measures there, which will do about the same thing. You have about 20%, not even 20%, it caps at 20%. It's like 15% extra DPS. Fall from Grace literally does more DPS than Desperate Measures when you're at 1 HP. Again, there's an asterisk here because it depends on the amount of armor your opponent has. And you do lose the human, and the humans aren't useless, for sure. But it's insane. It's super crazy. And then Smuggler as well. I'm still not sure if I want to bump this down like 1 tier below Fall from Grace. It does depend a little bit. I've started doing some calculations on this. The EV calculations on Smuggler are a little bit tricky, but my boy Yusu-san has helped me out a little bit with, setting up like a program to do that. And we're currently working through some variables together. I'll get back to you on this. I do think there's a chance I might be about to bump Smuggler below Fall from Grace, but Smuggler is also completely crazy. If you get this on round 10, the value on just getting proportionally stronger items, the power spike from tier 3 items to tier 4 items is also very insane. Getting something like an extra Radiance over, what you could have otherwise gotten, or something like, when you're against the Big Black Dragon or the Trolls, being able to pick up a tier 5 item can be super game winning, especially if you get one of the top ones. So these are both completely insane, very, very, very powerful picks. Then we've got Silver Lining. Not too sure how I feel about this one. You might notice the little green asterisk there. And as you can see on the right, the asterisk means only take this in the first 3 rounds. So if you see this on 10, do not pick this. Or 15. But basically, this is just for the first 3 rounds of the game. And if you force a lose streak, it's good. I will say, if I get this on round 3 and I already have a good board, like I've got a level 2 and a cohesive strategy, I might not actually take this over something like an Arcane Boots or a Mask of Madness. I might just try to fight for the board and play for win streak instead. To be quite honest, I'm not positive that I want to keep this above like Arcane Boots, Mask of Madness. I'm going to have to do some calculations. It's very good, but it does limit you to playing a very specific strategy. And gold is good, but so is having an additional item that's going to be on your board for the entire game. Like Arcane Boots and Mask of Madness are very powerful as well. Next up, Arcane Boots. So these are pretty nuts. They're not necessarily going to be useful on every build, but being able to have just like, you know, the additional mana for your team is very good. Typically, you just want to equip this on something that's going to be able to spread the mana as much as possible. Something on the front line because they charge mana faster because they take damage, but being able to get your spells off faster is a huge deal. On something like mages, this is quite top tier because it's all about just getting your mana faster than your opponent. Then we've got Mask of Madness, Brooch of the Aggressor. Honestly, these 3 items, Arcane Boots, Mask of Madness, and Brooch of the Aggressor, they're a little hard to rank for the same reason that the other alliances are hard to rank, because it really depends what you're going. If you're in something like a mage build, well, Brooch and Arcane Boots are insane, and Mask of Madness is not that useful. You put it on like a Crystal Maiden. But if you're in something like a Ranger or a Hunter build, you'd probably rather have Mask of Madness than either of them, although Arcane Boots could be a close contender. Brooch of the Aggressor is pretty solid as well. All 3 of these items are probably about even, although I do think I favor Arcane Boots a little bit. I might do some calculations on these and see if that ends up changing things. But anyway, these are all, in my mind, a little bit better than Blade Mail. Blade Mail falls short right now, just in terms of comparing it to the other main tank items, those being Chainmail and Vanguard. These are the 3 items in the entire game that will basically be designated on your main tank. If you position so that you have one super tanky hero, your tankiest hero, something like a Pudge, like a level 2 or level 3 Pudge, in front of everything else, you equip it with a Vanguard, or maybe a Chainmail, or maybe a Blade Mail. That's going to do super well for you. A main tank can also be something like a Naga, like Slardar, or Medusa with Retaliate, will also be very good. And basically, part of the reason Blade Mail is a little lower here is just because Vanguard and Chainmail are so good. So it kind of loses a little bit of a niche there. That being said, I'd value Blade Mail a bit higher if I haven't found a Chainmail yet in the game already. Next up, Octarine Octarine Essence. Reduces ability cooldown by 50%. I don't think this item's super useful. There's a couple things that I've put it on to decent success. You can put it on like a Timber Saw. You can put it on like a Witch Doctor in Warriors. It's not bad. I think there's probably a handful of about 5 heroes in the game that can use this decently, but unfortunately, it's just not as good as the rest of the other items. I think it might be a little underrated, and as I do more experiments, there's a chance I'll bump it up. Blink Dagger, this is basically useless. Don't pick this. There are niche applications. There really are. I'm experimenting with some. There's like putting it on an axe is kind of a funny meme, because Axe will blink back, charge his mana, and then maybe get a call off. A lot of people are messing around with something like that. I think that's almost certainly bad, but it's something that does deserve, you know, a little bit of experimentation with. Either way, this is just not really a good item. There's maybe like possibly one specific situation that might end up being able to use this in, but I don't think I'm going to be ranking this higher than I do now. It's just not really worth an entire item slot. Vanguard, starting off the tier 3s. Vanguard is really, really good right now. So Vanguard, because it gives 250 health and blocks 70 damage on half the attacks, basically on average it will be blocking something like 30 to 35 damage per attack. This is insane. You put this on something like, again, your main tank hero, you put it way in front, you like two rows in front of everything else, everything locks onto that hero. They gain less mana because they deal less damage. Sometimes they gain almost no mana from attacking a vanguarded unit, right? They're just all basically attacking this unit, doing nothing, while your team just comes in, 1 or 2 steps later and kills all of them. This is ridiculous. I think it's extremely powerful, but hard to compare to Retaliate, which is next up. Now, this is another asterisk one, because you do need a Naga. Not every comp can run a Naga, but typically it's not that hard. You know, hunters will end up with maybe like a Tidehunter level 2 later. Warriors, you bet your ass you're taking this with warriors. You want this on something like the Slardar. It will do very well for you, and as soon as you get it, it's like the same thing as Vanguard. Once you get this, that's a main tank item. You put your Slardar way in front of everyone else, put your other units like 2 rows back, and everything will lock onto the Slardar. This deals 240 pure damage just off of one attack. Just off of one attack. This is like a blade mail that does literally 10 times as much damage. That's not an exaggeration when I say 10 times as much. If you have this on a unit up in front that's like a 2-star Slardar or something, it's about 10 times as much damage as a blade mail. This is also pure damage. This will go through Knight's shields. This will go through armor and magic resistance. This is a really insane item if you have a board that can fit an Anaka, which not every board can. When I get this in Assassins, I typically will put in a Medusa or something, a level 2 Medusa as my 9th hero, and I'll put it up way in front. When I get this in Warriors, it goes on my Slardar. When I get it in Hunters, it can actually be a little bit awkward, because sometimes Hunters won't have the ability to find a Tidehunter level 2 for like the good retaliate for it, and also Hunters are very item dependent, so sometimes I might take, you know, like a good item like a Skullbasher or a Daedalus over this if I don't look like I'm getting Tidehunters that game. But you can also run this in Slardar and Hunters, because Hunters have one flex warrior slot as well, so even if you don't have Tidehunter, this is good in Hunters as well. You can run this in Mages, although Mages are probably gonna be a little focused on some other items. Basically, this item is nuts. You can run it almost anywhere. Highly, highly underrated. A lot of players, when like new to the game, look at this the first time, they probably think it's kind of ass. I know I did when I saw this the very first time. I was like, that doesn't look that good. But it truly is nuts. Next up, Skullbasher. Skullbasher is crazy. So hidden text on Skullbasher. So first of all, when it bashes, it does 100 pure damage to the target. That's pretty good. You know, let's do a little calculation on that. That means every 4 attacks, somewhat, you're getting 100 extra damage, which is like 25 extra damage per attack. Which means when you compare this to Relic, this is much better. Being able to put this on a ranged unit. By the way, there is this myth going around that this item has a lower chance to proc on ranged units like it does in Dota, which isn't true. It's the same on melee and ranged units. So it's a great item to put on anyone damage dependent or that attacks very quickly. Slap it on Troll Warlord, slap it on Medusa, slap it on basically anyone survivable, and this will do extremely well. Not too much more to say about this, it's just like the stun chance is great. Also, fun fact, there is a cooldown on the stun, so I believe it's about a 2-second cooldown before you can stun again once it procs, which means it's not exactly plus 25% damage per attack, because sometimes the proc won't happen again on cooldown, but still a very powerful item nonetheless. Next up, we've got Eye of Scottie. So this is 400 health, and it slows enemies on attack. This is basically VIP Booster's big brother. So the slow applied to enemies is 45% attack speed slow, which means they're attacking about half as fast, dealing about half as much DPS, gaining about half as much mana from attacks. That's very powerful. A lot of people underrate the slow, but the slow is super good. One thing to note about this, it doesn't actually apply to Medusa's split shot. It's a visual bug. It does look like it applies. It looks like it applies, but it doesn't. Additionally, with this, your ranged units will apply the slow for 2.5 seconds, and your melee units will apply it for 5 seconds. So typically, you kind of want this to be on a front line. I mostly just use this as like a big VIP booster. Typically, when I get it, it's going to be going on someone who's attacking pretty much someone in, like, you know, in the back or the front. It doesn't really matter. Anyone attacking. You can use this as a VIP booster if you have something like a Tidehunter or an Enigma level 1 that needs to get its ability off. But I will say about Scottie, it's a little conflicting, because its powerful slow effect means you want to put it on a unit that's going to survive for a long time during the fight. But its high health, the fact that it gives 400 health, means you kind of want to put it on something that is vulnerable to being killed early, right? So you can kind of never really gain too much value out of both of the effects at the same time. If you put it on a tank, you're kind of wasting the slow. Or sorry, not a tank, but some unit that wants to stay alive to get an ability off. And if you put it on anyone else, you're kind of wasting the HP. So it does kind of lose some ranks because of that. But I still currently rate it a little bit higher than Mechanism. Mechanism is an item that is pretty good. I might end up, you know, changing my ratings a little bit to put this maybe ahead of Scottie, possibly, but honestly this item looks a lot better, I think, than it actually ends up being. You do want to slap this on a unit with, you know, that takes damage fairly quickly, but not necessarily too quickly, something kind of central to your board, one of your tanks, like your side tank, and it'll heal a lot, but most of the time the AoE heal isn't that useful. It's good against something like hunters or something like knights that do a lot of physical AoE with like Luna Glaives or like split shot from Medusa, but against mages who have the most AoE, this is not gonna cut it, my friend. This 250 health, mages nuke for like 4,000, so this is not gonna keep you alive against mages. Don't even think about it. However, I might end up bumping this up a step. I'm not sure. I would still need to do some calculations there. Sacred Relic, plus 60 attack damage. Just a worse item than Skull Basher, but on certain heroes like Luna, Medusa, these heroes have abilities that scale with how much attack damage they have, with like their bounces and split arrows, which means that on these, it ends up being about the same as Skull Basher, I would say. Honestly, I'd still say a little bit worse, but if you have both a Relic and a Skull Basher, you definitely put the Relic on that hero and put the Skull Basher on someone else. Ultimately, Relic is still a good item. It's low ranked on tier 3, but tier 3 is pretty powerful compared to something like tier 2. Tier 2 has like a few very nutty things at the top, but even though this is low on tier 3, it's still something that's going to be doing very well for you. It's just there's only kind of 2 bad tier 3 items, except for, of course, all the alliances, all the alliance items that you can't pick. Anyway, next up, Hood of Defiance, 50% magic resistance, 10 health regen. Not too much to say about this. It's kind of mage. Put it on a unit that wants to stay alive long into a fight. Health regen, not that good. But honestly, if you're, you know, something like heads up against the mage, you can actually be able to take this pretty effectively. And finally, we've got a higher class of criminal. This is pretty useless. Sometimes taking it in hunters can be okay. I'm not sure if I would take this over almost anything in hunters, just because hunters are a comp that requires very expensive things. You know, you need Medusa, you need Mirana, you need Tidehunter, preferably all 3 being level 2. So something that kind of favors expensive units, or if you're brave enough to be trying to run like a scrappy comp, higher class of criminal can be okay. Ultimately, though, it's just not really going to do very much. You really just want like powerful items, or items that give you more items. You'll notice embarrassment and smuggler are super high tier because they're items that give you better items, but items that give you better units, like higher class of criminal, or the items that give you rerolls, or the items that give you gold, are typically ranked really low on this list. Okay, next up, we have tier 4, getting into the big leagues. Radiance, right at the top, baby. This item is crazy. You guys know this is crazy. All you have to do is look at the DPS. I mean, there's nothing really fancy about this one. This item is kind of insane. Now, it will depend a little bit on having something to put it on. You need to put it on a big, chunky dude. Like a level 3 Pudge is amazing to put this on. Something like, for example, any level 3 that doesn't really need like main to tank capabilities is amazing for Radiance. This does work with Batrider Sticky Napalm, which makes this hilarious to put on Batrider. Your Radiance ticks will be plowing through the enemy on Batrider. People have achieved like 20k DPS with Batrider 3 with a Radiance. It's absolutely insane. Pretty funny item. Not too much more to say about this. I'd recommend typically putting it on melee heroes. As much as it is funny to put this on Batrider, I'm not even necessarily sure that I would recommend doing that in knights, because it does lead to some hilarious nonsense, but you really want to put this on melee heroes because they'll walk forward close into enemies' range, as opposed to ranged heroes, which will kind of hang back and won't be able to spread the aura as much as they would like to. Next up, Refresh Orb. This one's situational. You need like a level 2 Kunkka for this to be good, ideally. Level 2 Tidehunter would be also very good. You know, any big level 2 like teamfight AoE. Honestly, I suspect I might end up bumping this item down a little bit. It's kind of hard to rate here. It's kind of like Arcane Boots. It's very situational. It depends on kind of what you have and what you're going for. But when it works, it's pretty game winning. When you have like a level 2 Kunkka, which is pretty common for a lot of builds to go for, this will do very nicely for you. Then Daedalus and Moonshard. So a bit of a caveat. You guys might notice I rank them the same. Now, if you are a math nerd and you talk to other math nerds, you'll probably have heard that Daedalus is better than Moonshard. and I think this is actually often true, but I rank them the same here. The reason I rank them the same here, so basically, as I mentioned in the earlier comparison between gloves and claymore, attack speed is better for higher amounts of damage. You gain higher damage when you level up. So if you have a 3-star hero, something like a Moonshard is probably going to be better for them. If you're in Assassins, something like Moonshard is definitely going to be better for you. If you have a unit that wants to charge mana, like if you're in Mages, something like a Moonshard is definitely going to be better for you. Because you put this on a Coddle, he will charge mana very, very quickly, almost twice as fast. 80 attack speed is 80% attack speed increase, which means 180% as fast mana charging on Coddle. That's insane, and it will do more for you than a Daedalus in a build like Mages. So even though Daedalus is stronger in general in theory, Moonshard has a lot of exceptions where it ends up being stronger, which is why I end up putting it on the same tier as Daedalus. So again, if you have a 3-star, if you're in Mages, if you're in Assassins, those are the typical situations where Moonshard's better. Daedalus ends up better against Elves because critting will go through evasion in this game, which is an interesting mechanic and one I like, but obviously Elves are kind of like shit right now, so I doesn't really add that much there. Basically, these two items are about equal. If none of those situations apply, Daedalus is better though, so... Dagon. Dagon is next up. Honestly, this is a really hard one to evaluate. You guys might have heard me say that about tier 4 items, because all of them are really good, except for the 4 that are really bad. But Dagon is quite good. Being able to burst something out before they cast their ability feels like it's almost as impactful as, you know, the 4 items above, which are all super high tier, basically. And there's not too much to say about this. Fun fact, if you put it on Batrider, it'll do a little bit of extra damage because it does work off of sticky napalm too. That being said, you just want to put this on like someone that's not going to die immediately in a fight, and it doesn't... I mean, there's really not anything interesting to say about Dagon. Honestly, there isn't. Okay, next up, Pipe of Insight and Blacking Bar. These are ranked the same. These are kind of like the anti-mage cards. You guys might notice the asterisks. So you want to pick them when there is like a mage-heavy lobby, when there's 2 or more mages in the lobby, or there's a mage player that's doing really well in streaking. When you're looking at a mage player, don't evaluate how well he's doing by how much health he has, because mage players will usually have low health before they come online. Look at streaks, and look at boards. Those are really what you want to be looking at. If he's low health and he's streaking, I'm like getting kind of monka, you know? Like, I need to be thinking about Pipe and Black King Bar. I will say about Pipe, you're not always going to be able to fit it in. There's a lot of comps that don't really want to cluster up that much. So something like Warriors or something like Assassins won't be clumping together as much as something like Hunters or Mages or even like Trolls Knights, which makes Pipe better in like the last 3 builds there listed. BKB is definitely going to be something that you're going to want to take in like Assassins or Warriors more so. And they're both just kind of anti-magic items. They're honestly not like amazing in my mind right now, unless you are against those magic situations. They're just very situational. And then below that, we've got Maelstrom. A lot of people like this item. I really, really don't. So Maelstrom, 25% chance on attack to cast Chain Lightning for 100 damage to 4 targets. So 25% chance to do effectively 400 damage, which means on attack, on average, you're dealing 100 damage, which is pretty good. But, unfortunately, it doesn't charge your mana, unlike normal damage or normal attack speed. It charges your opponent's mana because they are taking damage. It's spread out across 4 units, which makes it really just like a little bit chunky. It's not really that good. And even though it's a higher amount of DPS, it just doesn't really do quite as much. I would rank this about as much as like a Skull Basher, in my opinion. I think I would favor Skull Basher a little bit more, to be honest, even though it's a tier 3 versus tier 4, but they're pretty similar, and that's kind of why this is so low, because even though it's tier 4, it is kind of on the same level as like a tier 3 there. So, next up, Battlefury. Melee only. Melee attacks cleave 30% damage to nearby units. This is currently kind of bugged. It seems inconsistent in terms of how the cleave actually works. It says nearby units, which implies 1 cell AoE, which is what nearby kind of means in Underlords lingo, but that's not actually how it ends up working right now. It's a little weird. It just cleaves like the side units. Not sure if that's bugged or if it's like the tooltip is a little off. If it's a bug, and if they fix it, this item will shoot up in rankings. I think there's a good chance that this item will be very powerful very soon. By a design standpoint, Battlefury is an item that is designed to be powerful. It is good in niche situations when boards are clumped. At high levels, players clump their boards because that's how you want to play this video game at high levels typically. And Battlefury will do very, very well for you in those situations. You've got a specific situation, high attack melee DPSer, boards clumped together. I have a prediction that in a couple of, you know, big patches, if they mix around like the items and maybe fix bugs or change the power levels, Battlefury, I think, has a good chance at ending up a very good item, but right now it just does not get there. And then, of course, we get into the friends and family discount, or as it's known, friends and family. It's just not worth it. It just gives you a little bit of extra gold at this point in the game. And gold is just not really that important of a mechanic when compared to other items. A lot of people, like, the first thing you learn in Underlords is that it's an economy-based game, right? And gold is kind of the #1 most important thing. You gotta econ, you gotta play for interest. But in reality, the reason economy is so important is because it makes your board stronger. It's the only thing that makes your board stronger. Your health doesn't make your board stronger, right? It's your economy that does. And when you're picking, when you're playing and making decisions in the game, it's like, wow, economy is so important, I have to favor this. But in reality, when you're choosing this over an item that immediately impacts your board in a permanent and powerful way, it is not worth it over an item, right? So keep that in mind. And lastly, Vicious Intent. Honestly, it's about the same. Doesn't really end up doing much. Each one of your surviving units, including summons, deals 1 additional damage to opponents if they lose to you. It's a very funny item. I wouldn't recommend taking it. It doesn't make you stronger. It doesn't increase your ability to win boards, which is what matters. It just might knock an opponent out, which is funny. To be honest, if this was a tier 3 item, it actually might be a little bit better, because that's like the point in the game where if you're like win streaking and if you get a tier 3 item, this could actually punish an opponent for, like, you know, like a mage player trying to lose streak. They might actually get knocked out by this. But because it's tier 4, it comes online a little bit too late in the game for that to happen, really, right? Like, it's just a little bit too late. People have stable boards. The loose streakers have built the strongest boards in the game by the time this typically will come online. So, it's not really worth ever taking. Lastly, tier 5. The really, really big items. To be perfectly honest, I'm not 100% sure on my rankings for these, just because I rarely ever, like, you do rarely ever see these items. So a lot of this is based on theory, because some of these items I've only picked once, right? But at the top we have expanded roster. The ability to have an additional level 2 unit with a big AoE stun is just broken, basically. I mean, refresh is good because you get a second stun sometimes, but like being able to slide like a level 2 Kunkka in to any board, a level 2 any like 5 cost any legendary unit, this is just very good. You guys know it's very good. This is not a secret. Expanded roster is very good. Next up, we've got Desperate Measures. So when you're at something like 5 HP left, this will increase your damage of all units and mana gain on damage taken or received by a total of, at that point, 19%, right? So basically, the way you can think about this is it's a DPS increase of about like 17 or 18%. Like in the endgame scenario, one-shot range is like 15 health. So I would say it's 17% attack damage increase. 17% is like a good way of thinking about this, which is pretty good. Like I said, I mean, it's like a fall from grace. It's better than fall from grace, but it is a tier 5 instead of a tier 2. So, I mean, I should hope it's a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, again, goes to show how good fall from grace is. It's ranked very high here just because, I mean, even if you have high health, you shouldn't be like, oh, I've got high health, I can't pick this. Because, I mean, you're going to get to lower health, right? You just think about this, like, the game will be decided based on, like, who wins when both players are kind of at the end of the ropes, right? When they've both spent all their health and both spent all their economy, because health is a resource. And at that point, this is going to be increasing your DPS by about 17 or 18%. I think 18% is actually more accurate, which is pretty good. Next up, we've got Shivas Guard, which honestly might end up being higher than Desperate Measures. I think I need to do some math on this again. I will be updating my tier 5 sometime in the next week, but it's also extremely good. The attack slow will start at the start of the fight for 4 seconds. Movement and attack speed slow is really, really insane. Every enemy takes 250 damage. The unit you get has 10 armor, so this is even decent on a main tank unit. If you went the entire game without finding like a chainmail or a Vanguard, you slap this Shivas Guard on your level 2 or level 3 Pudge and go to town, right? Make sure you have this on a unit that's close to the front at the start of the fight, because this will trigger immediately when the fight triggers, and you want this to be able to hit as much of the board as possible with its shorter AoE. Okay, next up, we've got Divine Rapier, 330 attack damage. And if you lose a round to another player, they get the Divine Rapier. This item's hilarious. I think it's really good. I've only ever gotten it once or twice. It's basically pretty insane. It depends on your build a little bit, but it will do very, very well for you if you have a build that does have like a DPS unit. I would highly recommend taking this. One caveat, don't take this if you think you're about to lose to a board. If you get this early and you don't feel like you're online yet somehow, don't take this. Once you take this, you need to basically dump all of your economy out. Do not play for interest anymore. Protect your board at all costs. Okay, next up, Assault Curious. So, it's a pretty interesting item. You actually built this in auto chess a decent amount of the time. The fact that it's like just adjacency, it's gotten a little power creeps, honestly, when it comes to Underlords. Stuff like Shivas just feels like it is going to be better. This will do very well in something that is compact, like a Hunter build will be able to use this beautifully, because you will be able to put this on your Drow, and she'll be just like huge aura carrier with her own aura, plus Assault Curious, you keep things nearby. Very good. I'd mostly think of this item like for Hunters, or Trolls Knights, or maybe mages, just because attack speed is nice on mages, you get faster mana charging. But for something like warriors or something like assassins, you're not clumping, you can't really use these auras. So it's going to be something that you're definitely going to need to keep in mind. And then further down, we've got Bloodthorn. Bloodthorn, I think, is a little bit low here just because the competition is so incredibly brutal. Typically, you'll be able to silence the thing that has the most mana the fastest. However, if your opponent's smart, they can just make sure that something that's like not super important is the one that is kind of front tanking. That will gain mana the fastest, which means that's going to be the one that gets silenced. And silence is not going to matter so much on that, right? However, the additional like DPS on that front tank will be a big deal. The crit for 140% is nice. Unfortunately, it just doesn't compete with other stuff like Shivas Guard, Desperate Measures, or Rapier. Further down, we've got Heart of Tarrasque. Heart of Tarrasque is, unfortunately, it just doesn't really do enough here. 1000 HP and regenerating slowly is very powerful. It's just not quite as powerful as I believe the rest of these are right now. You don't really want this to be on something like a main tank. On a main tank, you'd rather have damage block or armor. Not something that heals like per second, although the unit you put this on will pretty much just not die. It can still get bursted down by a powerful comp, and if you're in tier 5 items, you expect your heads up against a really, really powerful comp, right? So I don't think there's too much of a place for this item just compared to the other tier 5 items and how good they are. And then lastly, we've got Recruiter. Recruiter is just artifact tier. Like, I would highly recommend never taking Recruiter. I think there's like, it's almost laughable how bad this is. Like this item, it's hard to describe. The first reroll every run is free does basically nothing for you. Really, really not good. Don't ever pick this item. All right, and that's it. So that is it. That's all the items in the game. I don't think it's possible for me to really put alliance-based items here. Those alliance-based items are just as good as the alliances they represent. Pretty much all of them that are attached to good alliances are good. I don't think there's, off the top of my head, I don't think there's a single one that's like, oh yeah. I guess Elusive is bad, the invisible one, but that alliance is kind of bad, so. Anyway, that's it. Hopefully I'll have some kind of like updated version. It'll be cool to do this like maybe like every month. I'll do like my updated versions, or like when there's like new expansions. I think items are really interesting. I'm kind of a nerd, and the items are very much about math and theory crafting. It took me a week. I've been juggling around these tiers in my head for a long time, And I've gone in a lot of different directions. Like, if you had asked me a week ago, I would have given completely different answers. You know, there was a time where I thought claymore was quite good, for example. But there's a ton of math and theory that goes into this, and I'm just really into that. So I really like the idea of doing item tier lists. I know a lot of you guys are asking for like hero tier lists. I don't know if I even ever wanted to do one of those, to be perfectly honest. I think that hero tier lists are not really good for you if you want to be a good player. I do want to give you lists of competitive compositions, and I think that's a good way for you to improve and try to learn what to build towards. But if you're just picking things based on like what hero is good as opposed to what like fits what you're doing, it doesn't really make sense with how this game is played, the idea of a hero tier list in my mind. I just don't think that makes sense at all. It's like if I had added the alliances to this tier list, right? It's so situational, right? I don't think it means anything. Anyway, that's it. That's the ramble. I'm done. I'll see you guys, you know, next month or whatever when I do my updated item tier list. Until then, peace out, boys.